So I'm here today with Sherry and Michael. This is going to be the fourth part of our discussion on the Apocalypse of St. John by Emil Bock. Um, this will be on chapter 3 of the book, even though this is our fourth part because the first discussion really only covered the foreword. So we're up to chapter 3, and Bock's chapter 3 coincides with the images in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. So does anyone want to get us started with just like an overall impression or reflection on the reading?
Um, I mean, it's this is such dense material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the densest chapter yet, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's making a pretty audacious claim that certainly like kind of challenges at least the kind of reading I grew up with for sure. Like, how did you, um, Sherry, I'm interested in your perspective because the Orthodox kind of have this like this reading of the uh, of the of the cycles of seven in Revelation as being cyclical,
Yeah, I
reflecting cyclical time. So I think from an Orthodox perspective, I'm wondering if like maybe you found his claim that the fourth and fifth chapter actually represent well, they have apocalyptic content in both senses of apocalypse, but they're also are like he says refers to them as like a New Testament retelling of Genesis.
right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with Orthodox theology to know much. Like I couldn't speak, for them. But
Sure.
I do know that like I have listened to John Bear on this quite a bit, and he has said that Revelation should come after the book of John, the Gospel of John. Sorry.
Right. Which
Um,
which would make us in this context, I think that would make us link the prologue of John's Gospel
mhm.
to this text in Revelation,
Well, because
at least from Bock's standpoint.
yeah, and John Bear does point out that the Gospel of John it's framed in that creation story, right? So it starts out with in the beginning, and then it goes when Christ dies on the cross. He says it is finished, and it's within that frame. I think that John is trying to make that point, and it's the only gospel that Christ says it is finished, right?
Right.
So,
well, and you also have this too, like the Lamb appears again in Revelation chapter 14 and 15, which we haven't got to that part of the text yet. But I think most of the people that are going to be listening to this are familiar enough with the text to have some idea of the rough structure of the text. So it's not until in chapter 14 and 15 you have the Lamb reappearing in what I would say is definitely a properly eschatological mode for sure, no question about that. But prior to that, and Revelation 13:8, that's where you have the verse that refers to the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world, which to me seems to be an internal textual reference that verifies the reading that Bock is giving it.
yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, like I'm starting to see what he's talking about. There are definitely some areas in there that I question,
Sure. Yeah, me too.
I'm not saying like I'm buying it all, and stuff like that, but
No, it's really that piece that I'm like, yeah, I think he's right about that. Like,
yeah,
and I'm starting to I want to talk about what I think he got right
yeah, exactly.
before we talk about some of the areas that I'm less sure about.
Well, I think he got a lot of things right, actually.
Yeah, right,
A lot more than he didn't, let's say. And
right,
those things I couldn't even say, conclusively whether or not they were wrong or right, because they're
What
Yeah.
did you think about what he says in the context of like establishing this as like, okay, so he basically he references like chapter 4 as kind of like a representation of stasis before the cycle of time has
Yeah.
really been initiated. And he I know that you've had some thoughts on the sea of glass imagery before.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think about like how he connects that to like this like this stasis and this sort of like early purity of material creation as it's first being formed?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thoughts that I had on the Sea of Glass are different than his, because he's talking about it as a pre-creation, manifestation of the state of the spiritual state of being, really, right?
Right.
What I thought was interesting about the Sea of Glass was that, I mean, I ended up talking to someone from the Pasho server about this once, and
Oh,
he had written an article on the Symbolic World blog about sand and the symbolic nature of sand.
hmm
I didn't read his thing, but I said to him, "Don't you find it interesting?" Because sand, oh, I know. He said sand is kind of like it's like a border, but it's a multiplicity, right? Because they're all little individual grains, and it holds the water back, so to speak. And I said, well, don't you find it interesting, though, that in Revelation, the sea is actually the sand solidified? Because that's what crystal, or glass is, right? Is sand in one solid form. And then we just kind of, it was just a passing thought that I had. And then he mentioned, the idea of unity and multiplicity in that.
yeah. It's
right?
also, I think for Bock, Bock seems to view it as more crystalline than
He's
glass
talking
per
about,
se too. Like crystal is more of his.
it's more of an earthy substance for Bock.
Right.
Like
Right.
a natural formation of something.
Right.
Although, I mean, sand will become glass in high temperatures. It's natural too, right? But
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, those were the two things that we talked about in regards to the crystal sea, and I just thought it was interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He mentions too that or at least here he says the spherical sea is in the process of crystallizing. I don't know where he gets in the process from the text, but I
Yeah.
thought it was interesting that I'm curious. I mean, are you guys are seeing this as kind of like a pre-creation moment? And
I think that the best argument that I can make for that is it is in Revelation 13:8 that we have the reference to the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And we just had, like, if you go back a few chapters, we just had the lamb image in Revelation 4 and 5. And then we have the lamb image repeated again in a more clearly eschatological sense. So I think that it's tying the beginning. I think that that's tying the beginning and the ending together, and is showing that creation and resurrection are of the same pattern.
Well, I kind of get the impression that it's like a heavenly perspective of creation. It's the spiritual version of creation. Like we've got the material version of it, right? The things that we can touch and see.
Right. So whereas Genesis shows us what was going, like it showed the point of view we get in Genesis is kind of like what's going on in the material realm. And what this is showing us is what's going on in the heavenly realm at the same moment.
Right. And what's at stake? Like what it took to make it happen in the first place, right? And I find that
it requires sacrifice. And the other thing that Bock's reading has going for him is like just like in terms of symbolism, like this like tying of sacrifice to creation has like deeply symbolic roots across mythologies.
Yeah.
The thing is and this in the typical Christian fashion, it takes the old pagan patterns of sacrifice and creation and turns them on their head. because in the pagan models, it's always like some hero god is like, carving up a carcass of some kind of chaos monster or something like that, right? So it's created through violent sacrifice,
Well,
right?
it's kind of an act of vengeance.
Right. It's an act of vengeance. So yeah. So it's telling you no. It's telling you so much because it's telling you no, that is not how the world is born. That is not, and it's telling you something about God too, right?
Yeah.
Versus the gods and what the power of the gods is versus what God's power is. It shows you how that is literally inverted.
Yeah.
Like rather than seizing and dominating and controlling and carving up and mastering, it's done through the self-sacrifice of one of the persons of the Trinity who steps
Yeah.
forward into that pregnant pause that's kind of in the middle of the text. I like how Bock talks about how there's like this dramatic tension within the text. That when the angel says like, who can do this? It's a legitimate question. Like,
Well,
how can this be done?
he describes this super stillness, right? Peacefulness.
Right.
Or I don't even know if it's peaceful. But it's just, yeah, and it's kind of like
Stasis for sure.
it's a calm before a storm. That's
Right.
that kind of tension that you feel,
Right.
But like to skip right to the very last paragraph.
Go for it. You got something you want to read?
He says, in regards to what you were talking about, sacrifice, he says, love is a greater magician than force. The line in Goethe's story, love is wonder working, expresses the deepest cosmic principle. Sacrifice is the power which calls a new world into being. At the beginning, the middle, and the end of earthly existence stands the picture of the Lamb, Christ's great sacrifice made possible for the first creation of the earth. At the turning point of time, through the sacrifice of the Lamb on Golgotha, the miracle of the resurrection was brought about. At the end of our age, through men who have learned to offer themselves together with the sacrifice of the Lamb, the resurrection of the earth will be added to the resurrection of man achieved through Christ. I just don't see anything wrong with that.
No, I don't see that.
Right.
And it's like, especially if you take John Bear's hint to read it in connection with with John's gospel, this is so through him all things were made, and this is showing you how it was done.
Right.
It's like it wasn't just like he snapped his fingers, and like creation has a cost associated with it.
And this is also why we understand it to be made by the Son, by Christ,
Right.
that he is creator, right? Like we talk about that because, well, I don't know about you guys, but for me, that was understood. Okay, I know it's Jesus because I think the Hebrew name that was used for God in that reflects Christ or the Son, and Christ is the image of the invisible, right? So, he is the part of the Godhead that created, right?
Right.
So you get this image of God kind of sitting back in a big armchair and his Son out there, making stuff. At least that's what mine was. And this is a totally different way of seeing it. It wasn't that he was out there, he was sacrificing. He was loving.
Right. And here's the other thing. And I also want to make it clear that this reading does not preclude the possibility of there also being an eschatological reading to it too.
Yeah,
because that's just not, symbolism doesn't work that way. It's not you don't have to choose a either or.
Yeah.
In the same way that the Orthodox Church chooses to read the cycle of seals and trumpets as vials as cyclical, right?
Yeah.
So this can be both a representation of the very beginning of things from the heavenly point of view, as Bock says, and yet still be a reference to a continuing apocalypse and what is yet to come, all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think Bock does, I can't think of where it is, but I know I've
Yeah, he
read,
does. Yeah, he does say that. I think like pretty early on. Let's see.
he talks about it being also now, like,
Right.
you know,
Correct.
yeah.
Well, that is like, and okay, I'm glad you said that. Okay, but well, I don't want to reference it. I want to talk about that because to me, that's like part of like why this, part of how we, part of how we can like this can resonate with us and that we can know that it's true is that if we think about like our own limited like co-creative, sub-creative capacity, and if we look at how that actually happens, like it has a sacrificial element to it. Like it
Yeah,
can't, you can't, like there is a, bringing anything into being has a cost. And then, it's like, well, I mean, if you look at like, I think like, becoming a parent is like probably the best, especially if you want to model how what the divine, which is, I mean, there's a reason why we call God Father, right? It's like, that is like probably the best way of understanding. It's like, you create this new life, but there's cost associated with that. You have to give of yourself in order to help this new life like become what it has the potential to be. It can't
you know,
happen without your self-sacrifice. And that's true of art too. Like it's like you have to sacrifice your time, your attention, a part of yourself. Like it's not going to just, there's
yeah.
never no cost.
Well, I'm going to say this, but then I'd like to hear what Michael's thinking about.
Okay. Yeah,
um,
yeah, me too.
so this idea of like, it's been really difficult for me to understand this whole idea of this being now, right? Like, because first of all, because it's always been a future event for me, like, growing up as in certain Christian circles, it was like I'm waiting for it to happen, right? I think the most eye-opening thing for me was when my priest told me that when I'm walking into the church, the Orthodox Church, I'm walking into the book of Revelation, and that every Sunday is an apocalypse where
Right.
something ends and something new begins. And now reading this, what he said to me there starts to click, because this sacrifice that Jesus made, the lamb, right? It's the pattern of being is fractal in nature, right? It descends and it ascends, right? It's everywhere present, filling all things. It's this resurrection power, right, that emanates out. And so when you are participating in it, and I don't mean just by going to church, I mean by saying yes to it. I don't know how else to express that, but when you're participating in it, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's the engine that helps us to become. Okay, it's the impulse, right? It's that sonic wave that went out into the universe and just keeps pulsating.
We can't become without it.
Right.
And you're being called to it in every moment. Because
Yeah. That's why it's now. That's why it's now.
as long as you think oh, I can autonomously define myself,
Yeah.
you can't become a human.
No.
Not
No,
a not,
you don't even know who you are.
right, exactly. You cannot become fully human
Yeah.
as long as you're clinging on to that.
Yeah.
And that letting go of that is that is a mini death and a sacrifice in a way too.
Just described being or being participating in being as like riding on the crest of a wave.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that wave is the sacrifice of the lamb. Okay. When the lamb was sacrificed, that wave went out, right? And when you're participating, you can either drown in it, in those waves, in that ripple effect, or you can get on top of it and you can ride it, right? And you can, and it'll take you places, and you'll be something. And
It's the only way you can be.
right.
Because the alternative is not the alternative is non-being. I mean, there's evil is it, evil has no positive being. It's not. There's nothing real about it. It is to choose the unreal over the real.
Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts, Michael?
Well, I'm really enjoying listening to you guys go back, because I mean, for me, all of this is very, like, it's such deep waters that is swimming in, and it's very revelatory for me of all the structures and concepts in me that are still kind of
Yep.
resistant to change.
Sure.
And so that it's like I'm kind of being bathed in it, and like I can't will myself to change it, but kind of as I just kind of sit with it, I can feel it changing me. One thing I would like to point out for those who are coming to this text and thinking, okay, who have their own sort of I don't know, preconceptions about what this book is intended to reveal or speak about. One thing you can't say is, I mean, this text in term it treats the original text much more seriously than any interpretation I've ever encountered.
Takes it deadly seriously.
And
Yeah.
it exhibits a greater love of the text than any 20th century account I've read of and there's a sort of love and depth into it that to me is says that there's something here. Even strike aside, whatever you think he gets right or gets wrong, there's
well,
there's
and
a
how,
deep,
and the other question is, and I'm sorry because you haven't been talking much, and I don't want to
Sure.
interrupt you, Michael, but it's like even that, like what he gets right and what he gets wrong. I would just want to focus on this because this is related to to the conversation we had about the McGilchrist Peterson conversation, because the what he gets right kind of thinking is like that's that like kind of left
Yeah.
brain analytical analysis of the text. And if you think that a left brain analytical analysis is the right way to come to a deeply symbolic prophetic text, that's probably not right.
Yeah.
But please continue.
Well, I think the point you make there is especially poignant for because I guess in some sense what I'm doing in making the comment is nodding to those folks that I know are kind of stuck where I'm at to some degree, and saying, where is the bridge that you can build from that stuckness into this. And yeah, I mean there's just yeah, I find it very, very, very interesting. And I think it would probably be difficult for me to be as open to it as I am without having had certain kind of experiences. Like one of the things that to me that's for a very long time I've been kind of adamant about and unwilling to let go of, even if I felt like it was even heterodox, was this idea of that God's paying some sort of ultimate cost for redemption and creation. That there doesn't seem to be a place for in most systematic theologies, and that seemed to me, and how I came to that was just kind of almost like a sort of mystical narrative of God that seemed just kind of revelatory to me in certain experiences, and so the fact that this seems to be trying to dig into that at a deep level is part of what helps me to see. And I'm still not certain. And I'll throw this question back to you guys: is what exactly is the nature of that sacrifice, and what is actually being put on the line?
That's the big question, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not certain about that either, Michael. It almost feels to me like like a super expenditure of all who he, everything he is, of everything Christ is. It's like all of it just empties, like you hear about this, he emptied himself,
Kenosis.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
kenosis.
and it feels like everything that he is, it gets emptied out into his creation.
And it overflows.
And yeah, and like I don't think it has much to do with the actual cross. I mean, yes, that was not from this perspective anyway. The cross was Christ's sacrifice, right? Going to the cross and humbling himself. But the way that temporal thing took place, the way that it's presented here is it's much greater than that. Like we think, oh, that must have hurt, getting the nails in his hands and being whipped, and look at how he suffered. But imagine if all of you was emptied out into all of something else. And that's what it feels like to me.
It wasn't in this particular chapter, but I think it was the previous chapter where he talks about.
I think it's ultimately. Go ahead, Michael. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to say one thing very quickly. I would say ultimately what it is it's God's gift of Himself to the creation.
Right.
Like,
yes,
that's what it is, and it's not holding anything back. It is the full overflowing fullness of God being gifted to the creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the thing I was going to point to, I think is related to what you just said, is he talks about God trusting man.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what the sacrifice is, because there's something about this that's enabling of us to be real participants in the drama, like not sort of just I don't know, like sort of puppets or anything. Like there's some sort of real agency that we get in this process, and that has real consequences for ourselves and each other, obviously, but also for God. And I'm not sure exactly what all that means, but I don't know. I think that's part of what's occurring is God puts himself into this vulnerable position where it's not even just that he trusts us, but that he puts us in a situation where he has to, like, there's a sort of like the sort of emptying of himself into his creation,
But he has to, not because of some sort of notion of contractual obligation. He has to because it's the nature of what he is.
Yeah, and
this
the
is why
nature of how
John's gospel tells us God is love. So, well, if we're going to understand God, then we need to understand. Then that would suggest to me that we might need to understand more about what love is. Like, what is the actual pattern of love? Like, what
Right.
is that?
Well,
What
and
is
it's
that?
also,
What does that do? How does it act? Like, what does it look like?
yeah, and that's what's funny to me is in a sort of classical theistic mode of divine impassibility, I don't see how there's anything God can really sacrifice. There's nothing he can really put on the line. There's no methodology for there to be skin in the game. There's this total otherness that always keeps a gap of real vulnerability and real sacrifice. And at least for me, maybe my mode of conception of that is just is off, but yeah.
Well, I was suggesting this to Cal the other day. And you can see what you make of this. But I was suggesting that, like, the proper way of thinking of and this is related to love too, because ultimately motion and love are connected. I really think so. There's like motion and emotion are connected, and ultimately so are love and motion. So it went, and we know from Revelation that from sacred scripture that God is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you can still say that God is the unmoved mover and is not composed of parts, but hold that he is motion itself. So he's still the source of the movement of all other things. He's still the source of motion. He's still the source of love. So that like that movement, that flow is part of his nature. So he's not changing. So he's still unchangeable. He's still not composed of parts.
Yeah.
He's just like it only becomes a problem when you think of God too much in terms of substance and not enough in terms of relation.
Yeah.
This is like what McGilchrist was saying, where like relation is prior to the things related. Yes, that's exactly right. And God is that relation. God, and that relation is love. And it is itself unmoved because it is motion.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense at all?
Well,
Oh
it's
yeah,
a-
it makes
yeah.
yeah, it makes complete sense. I would say this in terms of what I was saying earlier about the sacrifice and God trusting man. It's a sense in which God is pouring himself out and in some sense is reconstituted in some measure by our actions and in a more fuller and complete way. But there's a sense in which the choices we make and how we kind of put our little tiny fingerprints on this
Oh
big
yeah.
large story become a sort of a shape of who God is.
Right, because the whole thing is about reciprocal gift exchange. Like that's what I mean. This is what God wants of his universe. It's like he's already given the ultimate gift, and now he wants nothing more but to see that reflected in the creation, and for the creation to participate in this reciprocity of gift exchange.
And
Yeah.
it's a gift exchange that doesn't necessarily expect anything in return.
It can't. It's not. It's not. It's a gift. This is why I was critiquing Peterson's idea of sacrifice the other day.
Mm,
Like because like for Peterson, it's like I sacrifice for my future. No, that's nonsense. That's a transactional pagan idea of sacrifice. I want nothing to do with that.
yeah.
Like in fact, like gift isn't a gift if it's done in expectation of receiving something in return. And it's the more superfluous it is, the more gift it is. That's why some of the most precious gifts we receive like have zero material value,
Mhm.
right? Like people who are like psychologically healthy, they don't just say that it's like the thought that counts. They really mean that because it's actually like the spirit that the gift is given is what makes it truly gift. So when you have a young child who hasn't learned to write yet and
Mhm.
is barely able to draw figures that are recognizably whatever they're supposed to represent, and they make you a drawing and they hand it to you and you see the look on their face, like that's a real gift.
Yeah.
That's a real gift. The child didn't do it expecting anything in return. You don't receive it with anything other than just joy and delight. And I think that when God sees us engaging in that reciprocal gift exchange that he desires, that's how God reacts to us. He is delighted. He's like a delighted parent.
George MacDonald talks about he just describes a child sitting on his father's knee and being engaged in loving his father and kissing his father's face. And then he said, but love really happens when that child takes his father's bearded face and turns it to his siblings to be kissed too, right? Because he's
Right.
engaging in the act of loving for the sake of loving.
For the sake of loving.
And I think
Yeah.
that that's a really good illustration
Yeah.
of that kind of reciprocal giving, right?
Yeah.
Where you're offering up the opportunity for someone to love and be loved.
And I would say that understanding that is more important than any systematic theology that has ever been written.
Yeah.
Like if you are able to understand that, I don't really care how you articulate it. I don't really care what your system is. That's the thing. That is the
Yeah.
thing. That is the being as communion that we are called into that delights God.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also why MacDonald says that God is like a child.
Yeah.
Precisely for that reason, that he
Right.
has the heart of a child.
And,
Because
and-
he's absorbed
right.
in for the sake
As
of it.
any really good parent does, right? Because you have to like it's like, I mean, yeah, you have to still be a parent, but you also you need to like in order to be a good parent, you have to have the capacity to have spontaneous joy and delight in your child, and you need to be able to reflect that to them. That's how you're going to form them into being the kind of person that God wants them to be. Like, I don't, if they don't ever see that side of you, if they don't ever see you to have a capacity for spontaneous joy, to just delight in being with them, it's like, how are they going to learn it?
Yeah, well, I'm going to read it here because
Okay, go for it.
It's just so great. For when is the child the ideal child in our eyes and to our hearts? Is it not when, with gentle hand, he takes his father by the beard and turns that father's face up to his brothers and sisters to kiss? When even the lovely selfishness of love-seeking has vanished and the heart is absorbed in loving? In this, then, is God like the child, that he is simply and altogether our friend, our father, our more than friend, father, and mother, our infinite, love-perfect God, grand and strong beyond all that human imagination can conceive of poet thinking and kingly action. He is delicate beyond all that human tenderness can conceive of husband or wife, homely beyond all that human heart can conceive of father or mother. He has not two thoughts about us. With him, all is simplicity of purpose and meaning and effort and end, namely that we should be as he is, think the same thoughts, mean the same things, possess the same blessedness. It is so plain that anyone may see it. Yeah. And this is why he makes the argument that God is like a child, because he is simple in his desire, right?
Right.
It's just a
Well,
love for the sake
you
of
see
other.
him, you see in aspects like you see within God, like all of the like kind of archetypal aspects of humanity. You see child, you see father, you see mother. Like
Mhm.
it's all it's all there. Like
Yeah,
it's
and
all reflected.
we talk about the father one a lot,
Yeah.
and the mother one even, but we don't talk about the child likeness
No.
of God.
No. No, we don't.
And I think when we don't talk about it, we lose that perspective that he loves for the sake of loving, like a little child, right? That is, and that is the only way he could have made that sacrifice, actually. As an adult, as a thinking adult, he wouldn't have made it. He had to be like a child. He had to do it for the sake of doing it, for loving it, right? Loving us.
And loving the creation that had not even yet come into being.
And he was a child, Nate, right? He
Sure.
came as a child.
Right.
And he was the son of God.
Yes.
Right?
And he is
That's
one
true.
with the Father.
Yeah.
I was just going to say Chesterton has a really great quote about God's childlikeness as well. I'll just quote it here real quick. Because children have abounding vitality because they are in spirit fierce and free. Therefore, they want things repeated and unchanged. They will always say, "Do it again." And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony, but perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, "Do it again" to the sun, and every evening, "Do it again" to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never gotten tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we.
Mm.
Wow. That's
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
But what's in there too is that for me at least is that kind of that love as motion kind of thing that you were just talking about, Nate. Or there's
Yeah.
this consistency where I don't know, this emptying over and over and over again. And like that Bulgakov, that First Things article that was about Sergei Bulgakov's
Bulgakov? Yeah.
that on his religious materialism, that I found that, I mean, I I didn't even know why while I was reading. I kept like just coming to tears, and something to do with this connection to not just us, but to the whole of the cosmos and to everything, and a sort of unceasing commitment and a pouring forth into like a moment by moment sustenance and imbuing of himself into creation that I think was what I found moving there. And yeah, I think, I don't know, that's something of in a relationship to this idea of sacrifice.
Mhm.
Well, it has to be. I mean, it's not a sacrifice unless it's for another. That's why the Peterson's idea was like sacrificing for your own future doesn't work, because that's not really a sacrifice. That's just a transaction.
Yeah.
That's just a transaction that you're making with yourself.
Yeah, and transactions, unsatisfied transactions lead to bitterness and anger and resentment, which is hell.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I was wondering maybe if we could, just for anybody who's watching, because it would be kind of nice for them to hear some of the text.
oh yeah, absolutely. You
Because
got a quote that you wanted to read?
I don't have anything in particular, but I just, something that would illustrate the way that he's tackling the symbolism, like, I've got one here, just happens to be here actually. We are told that the lamb has 7 eyes. When he
Right.
talks about 7 eyes and 7 horns.
Yes.
Um,
And he contrasts with that with the beast who are covered with eyes.
right. So the picture of the horns points to the first earthly organs of the human being, which result, where is this? From densification. The equal number of eyes and horns express the balance between above and below, between the organs of divine vision and the first stage of bodily nature, vouchsafed to mankind at the moment of Earth's genesis. The 7-fold eyes through which the Lamb beholds the progress of the creative work initiated by him counterbalance the 7 horns, all the more effectively because in them the 7-fold creative spirits are mirrored, the Elohim described before as lamps. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in there.
Yes.
Yes,
there is.
And I knew nothing about 7-fold spirits, right? So I had to look it up. And it's mentioned in Revelation, I think 4 times or something like that, 7 spirits of God.
Mm-hmm.
And in, let me see here, I think Wikipedia here. Wikipedia says that there are different interpretations, right?
Mm-hmm.
7-fold ministry of the spirit, the 7 distinct spiritual beings, and a symbolic of perfection. But what I thought was kind of interesting was that they also had an image of the menorah.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
Do you know much about that? Like, is that actually symbolic of the 7 spirits of God? Or is that 7 characteristics of God?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. My first inclination is to hold Bock to his own
Yeah.
symbolic interpretation of 7, which he gives earlier in the text, and suggest that it has something to do with the motion of the Spirit of God in time.
Okay. And the eyes and the horns? The horns represent,
Well, the
you know,
eyes
the
are
evolution
connected. The eyes represent spiritual vision, but it also, again, it's 7 because it's like it shows like I think that the fact that it's 7 eyes, 7 horns, it's connecting the lamb to space time. It's showing you that this is the incarnation,
Yeah, heaven and
right?
earth.
This is an aspect of God that has been united to the fate of space time, and that's
Yeah.
why the sevens. The horns are something that materially grows. So I think his idea that that's related to like evolution,
Mhm.
to the progression of materiality through time, that seems to make sense to
Well,
me.
he talks about the densification, like, the colors, right? The white and the red are representative of spirit and soul. And I think even doesn't Dante have that?
I think, well, the reason he says densification is that both Steiner and Bock like have this. Are you familiar with Rene Guénon?
No.
Okay, so they like Guénon have this idea that like actually what's going on, like certainly at least like um in our time as human beings like grow further away from the spirit, is that things are
The body.
becoming more and more material.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
materiality is becoming denser.
This is what I was going to
Like
say about
so the
Dante.
material becomes more solid for us and the spiritual becomes more and more elusive for us.
Right. And I think too, I read that Ascension of Isaiah that Sam pointed out to me once, and I think it talks about the densification of bodies as they get closer to the earth as
Right.
well.
Right.
Dante does the same thing, like the higher up in the heavens, the more ethereal, and then the closer to the earth, the denser, right?
Right.
And it's like one of the things I really appreciate about Bock, because if he mentions something that I don't know anything about, it's not generally speaking something he's making up.
Right.
Like he's actually looking at ancient
Yeah, he's drawing
symbolism.
on some actual symbolic tradition. He's not making it up. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
he's not making it up. Yeah.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So, for sure. So as long as we're just like referencing the text, there was like one. This is just like a very short. I'm surprised you didn't want to read the Goethe poem, by the way. I kind of. So this is actually just after the Goethe poem, or actually it's an excerpt from a story actually. Just as in Goethe's story, so in the great cosmic drama of creation, love is the force which transforms the lion into the lamb.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Well, I'll read Goethe's poem just because you said that.
go for it.
For the eternal rules on earth, over the sea his glance prevails. Lions now must lambs become, and the waves must backward roll. The bright sword rests and does not strike. Faith and hope are both fulfilled. Wonder working is the love which reveals itself in prayer. Yeah.
Here's another comment toward the end. In the line of Goethe's story, love is wonder working, expresses the deepest cosmic principle.
Yeah.
Sacrifice is the power which calls a new world into being.
Yeah. Yeah, this is that ripple thing, that the image that it evokes in my mind anyways is kind of like this energy that just kind of moves out, and nothing can remain dead in its path, right? It springs to life, like it becomes, right? It moves right in, like being washes over it, and it lives,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really just like, to me, it's like to me, the idea of the lamb slain before the foundation of the world was always conceptually elusive before I
Yeah.
read this book.
Yeah.
And
No, I
it's
haven't
like,
heard.
and then it was just like the light bulb went off. It's like, oh, and it's like, I wondered how I missed it before. Well, I know how I missed it is I was reading it through this particular sectarian lens that I had at the time. And so, I've been trained to read the text in a particular way. So that's why I missed it. But it's such an obvious intertextual reference.
But
Like,
doesn't Lewis
that-
kind of tackle it like that too, though, in the Lion when Aslan is sacrificed on the stone table, and then when he comes to life, isn't there? I can't remember. I'm thinking about the movie.
Lewis. Well,
Isn't
no,
there
but Lewis, but
kind of an
all the-
energy
well,
that moves out?
both Lewis and Charles Williams like refer continually to the lion and lamb imagery like a lot
Oh yeah.
in a lot of their stuff. So that's a very common
No, but I'm
thread.
thinking about this idea of an energy that just moves out from
Yeah.
the sacrificial table that Aslan is laying on, right? When he's resurrected, and then all of a sudden, remember in the movie anyway, they're losing the battle, and then he comes to life, and then all of a sudden everyone is like restored.
And I don't know why, but for some reason that reminds me of the image of the image of the two, like the red and white beams of light projecting from the throne, which Bock connects to spirit and soul, the white representing spirit and the red representing soul. And I would say the interesting thing about him saying the red representing soul, that is really interesting, because that connects not only the son, but implicitly connects the father to created beings as well, because like red is the color of blood, which is the source of life, which is the animating animal soul of both men and beasts. So it's like that's being projected from the throne of glory.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I actually prepared for today with the chapter ahead of this.
So you'll be super prepared for next week. Do you want me to read that section of the text where he talks about that?
But
Okay.
I'm really curious about this whole thing now, because he talks about it even more in the following chapter.
Oh, does he really? Oh, okay.
And
Well,
it's
you
really,
can.
really
So
interesting.
you have extra
wanna
insight
jump
on
on it.
that one.
But yeah, read it. I'd like to.
Let's see. Trying to find it.
Hey guys,
That
unfortunately,
idea- Oh,
Okay, well,
I-
we'll save that. You know what? That's actually perfect, because Sherry has just indicated that he talks more about that in the next chapter. So we'll just have to leave that as a little teaser. So maybe next time we'll be talking a little bit more about the red and white light beams being projected from the throne of glory and what the symbolic meaning of those beams are. So that'll be for part 5 on chapter 4.
yeah.
Thank you for joining me today, guys. I appreciate it. It was a great chat, and I'll let you know when it gets posted.
all right.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.